Soundcheck 1 2 3. Soundcheck 1 2 3.
Good morning, everybody. We are live, and do not adjust your set. It is a planning committee on a Friday again. Today is April 5th, 2024, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. A reminder to keep all those phones quiet, please. In chambers with me today, we have Councillors Wang, M. Wilson, Taddison, Danko, Kretsch, and A. Wilson, and online, Councillor Francis and Councillor Beattie. Moving on, and quorum is present. To approval of the agenda. Clerk Kelsey, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Chair, there are changes. Under delegation requests, we have an added delegation request 6.1 from James Kemp regarding the Taxi Financial Incentive Program, item 11.1. Under public hearings, 10.1, application for zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 81 and 87 Rymel Road East. We have a revised Appendix B and an added written submission from Hamid Hakimi with Elite Developments. Also 10.2, the application for zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 64 Hat Street is being deferred to a future meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And may I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Kretsch, Councillor Wang. Let's go to the vote. It's spinning, so, oh, there we go. The vote's up. That carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, declarations of interest. Members of the committee, are there any declarations of interest today? Oh, Councillor Wang?
Despite the fact that this item has now been deferred, I just wanted to make sure that it was on the record that I have a disqualifying interest for 10.2, but it's being deferred.
It's being deferred, so you're good. Thank you, Councillor Wang. Okay, seeing no others, we'll move on to approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Could I have a mover and seconder to approve the minutes of the February 23rd, 2024 meeting as presented? Councillor Taddison, Councillor Wang. Any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote. Vote is up. That carries unanimously. Thank you. We're now on to delegation requests. We have a delegation respecting Taxi Financial Incentive Program, item 11.1 for today's meeting from James Kemp. May I have a mover and seconder to approve that request for today's meeting? Councillor Wang, Councillor Alex Wilson. We'll go to the vote. The vote's up. Good morning, Councillor McMeekin. Good morning. And that carries 10-0. Thank you, everybody. So we are now on to delegations. The one we just approved from James Kemp. Is James online? There he is. Good morning, James.
Hello.
Welcome. As you will well know, you have 5 minutes. You'll hear a ding at the 4-minute mark. Once you're ready, the floor is yours.
Very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairperson and members of the Planning Committee. Thank you for taking the time to hear from me today regarding report PED 24035, specifically the Taxi Financial Incentive Program. To begin, I have to take issue with the historical background in this report. To give a bit of context, the incentive program was created to provide a real on-demand option for accessible transportation, and it worked. By the beginning of 2020, there were over 40 accessible taxis in active service on the road. This allowed us to call for an accessible van and have one arrive within 15 minutes, pretty much anywhere in the city of Hamilton, therefore an effective service. However, in February of 2020, insurance coverage was changed in the city that required taxi operators to pay pretty much double what they had paid in the past, and this decimated our taxi industry. The following month, we had the lockdowns at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. During this time, the incentive program was halted, ostensibly because no one could retrieve video to audit the trips. What this report also doesn't mention is that it was halted for 18 months. That doesn't mean the taxi operators weren't picking up passengers, just as they were not receiving, it just means that they were not receiving any compensation during the program's year-and-a-half hiatus. When the program did start up again in August of 2021, no compensation was paid out to the drivers that fulfilled their responsibilities under the program. I would posit that this is one of the main reasons the reserve account is so robust at $250,000. It didn't pay out for a while. The other being that fewer taxis are participating while the rideshare provides more than can be spent. I would like to step back for a moment and discuss the real problem with accessible taxis. They cost a fortune to put on the road, costing upwards of $100,000 per vehicle. It also takes the driver significantly more time to effort to unload and load passengers, cutting into their profit margins. In other words, it is an investment. When the city paused their participation in the program for such a long time with no appropriate explanation or compensation, they destroyed any credibility they had with the taxi operators. Those that I have spoken to have no desire to further invest in the program. This was only made worse when conventional taxis were given permission to charge an additional $10 directly to the customer. Why should they bother upgrading their vehicles for at best $7 per rider? Well, I cannot speak to committee business as I have no standing to do so. I would like to mention the motion put forward by the ACPD in Q1 of 2022, as it is a matter of public record. In that motion, we raised all of our concerns and asked council and staff to work with us on finding a solution to the problem, and this isn't mentioned in the report. It also doesn't mention any consultation with the taxi brokerages, taxi operators, or people with disabilities, and yet the final statement reads, "Well, to date, the pilot program has been well received by users in the taxi industry. Staff are recommending a holistic report back on all taxi regulations that will include, consult with internal and external stakeholders, inclusive of municipal comparators." How can anyone say that everyone is pleased with the program without actually asking anyone that uses it? I cannot be clearer that this program is in a death spiral. As fewer and fewer taxis participate in the riders are less and less reliant on it. As fewer riders use the service, the operators see little benefit and take more cars off the road. The brokerages cannot make operators go out and drive the accessible taxi cabs as they do not control the licenses. I myself have even stopped considering the accessible taxis as a viable transportation option for more than a year. 19 accessible taxi operators cannot cover the footprint of the city of Hamilton effectively during the hours of operation required. While I understand that you're prepared to review the program with the Schedule 25 review, please understand that action is required now, not 2 or 3 years in the future. People with disabilities absolutely require some sort of on-demand service to fill the gaps in our current transit and paratransit programs. While it is not mentioned specifically in this report, except in the in lieu payment, rideshare companies are increasingly a problem for us as they increase their market share. Recent developments in BC regarding Uber and the class action lawsuit should also be considered, as the in lieu payment is not sufficient accommodation because this is 2024. This report does not accurately portray the current status of this program. I respectfully request that you ask for a more robust picture of the program before deciding to maintain the status quo. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. Just taking a look to see if there are any speakers for the delegate. Oh, Councillor Wang, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Kemp. Sorry, could you paint a picture of what status quo and current state was before the hiatus? I know that you had briefly talked about it. I think I might have missed it in your presentation. I wonder if you can go back to that particular point.
Mr. Kemp?
Certainly. Just before the hiatus, there was, I believe, over 40 taxis on the road, like the actual vehicles. And there were far more operators that were also signed onto the program. So you know, the vehicles themselves are one separate matter, then the drivers to operate them are another. So while it says 19 operators are in the program right now, that's 19 drivers. So at the time, they had, I believe, over 40. They had many more drivers that were able to cover multiple shifts on those vans. And the drivers were pretty happy. They were, you know, it was a successful program. They'd be very pleasant when they come on. They would load you properly. They'd be very safe. And we saw the program regress over this hiatus period until that it felt very unsafe. The drivers weren't taking the time to safely load you properly. They were very angry with you because you were wasting their time and they weren't being sufficiently compensated. And the program has never recovered. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kemp. Through you, Chair. Just my second question then. Before the hiatus, do you have a sense of the number of trips that were taken with these accessible taxis?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can tell you that it was enough to keep the program viable. Drivers were interested in the program. They were making some money on it. And what I hear from the operators more and more is it's not worth it for them anymore.
Okay. Thank you. I will reserve my questions for staff later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wang. And not seeing any further speakers, so thank you very much, Mr. Kemp. Appreciate your time. Okay, now I need a mover and seconder to receive the delegation, please. Councillor Wang, Councillor Taddison. We'll go to the vote. Vote is up. Thumbs up from Councillor McMeekin. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. So moving along, we're on item 9, consent items. We have 9.1, annual report on building permit fees, PED 24039 citywide. Could I have a mover and seconder to put that report on the floor? Councillor Taddison, Councillor Kretsch. Is there any discussion on 9.1? Councillor Kretsch and then Councillor Wang. Go ahead, Councillor Kretsch.
Thanks. I know there are other reports similar to this that we get at different times of the year that give us a picture of permits, permit fees, in the sense of being a discussion that happens widely. I know last year when I produced an annual impact report, it was really useful for me to have this information for Ward 2 specifically so that I could talk about, I think at that time was 600, and maybe it's not specifically related to this in the exact same way, but at that time there was like $615 million worth of building permits, fees collected, or building permits for applications that were going to be built, not necessarily the fees themselves. Is there a way to get this information broken down by ward is my question? To see kind of a relationship between fees collected, the value of permits, which I know the answer to already. I just want to be able to do some of that triangulation and wonder if that's an appendice that can be included either in the future report or if I can just get that information offline somehow and it can be circulated to all members of council.
Through the chair, my name is George Caetano. I'm the manager of plan examination. And in answer to the councilor's question, it could be broken down by ward if the data is available. So it's something that if council wishes to get that, we could break it down for a permit for construction value.
I'd be happy to move that if it's possible to do so. And I think Councillor Maureen Wilson is giving me the seconding eyes. So that we have that information shared with all of council and the public whenever it's appropriate to do so.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Wang and see if there are any other speakers, and then we'll come back to you. So, Councillor Wang, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, perhaps I could get an overview of what we use the building permit revenue stabilization reserve for. What are some of the different ways in which we would use this reserve?
Okay, looking to the bench, who can answer that?
Through the chair, I can give you a quick explanation. Basically, the reserve isn't the Building Code Act. It allows municipal or building division or building department to set up a reserve, and that's to cover basically any downturns on the industry. So we can cover wages, salaries, so that we don't let anybody go or lose any expertise. It's also meant to improve our service delivery in terms of related to the administration and enforcement of the building code. For example, we're doing digitization of microfiche. We're using our reserve to cover that cost instead of going through the levy. So anything to do with advancements or changes to the way we do things, we can use that for technological advances under building code and enforcement and administration.
Councillor?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just so understanding of the reserve has a fairly healthy number in there. Is there a plan to potentially what is the plan to use said reserve, or are we just keeping it as healthy as it is for years future?
Thank you. Manager Caetano?
Through the chair, basically there are some plans in the works in terms of some technological advancements we're looking at, maybe some plan review, electronic submissions. That would be used towards that. We also last year we didn't increase our fees as much as we could have. because we had a healthy reserve. We can look at that also in the future, right? But the idea there is if there's a downturn, we can at least maintain staff for a little while in terms of, so we don't lose that expertise.
Thank you. I will plan to take this offline with actually GM Zagaric, because I'd really like to understand if these reserves are being allocated to, say, technological sort of transfers, how does that fit in with our digital strategy? And are we using these pots of money in a holistic sort of sense? And is there a plan in place? So those are some of the questions that I have currently, but I'll take that offline.
Okay,
Thank you.
very good. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, not seeing any further speakers, so Councillor Kretsch, we'll go back to you if you had a motion.
Indeed. I don't think it's complex, but I also sent it to you just now as well, to the legislative coordinator, so that she has a copy in case I've said something that doesn't make any sense. But the city staff provide a breakdown by award of the annual report of building permit fees for the next planning committee meeting and as a part of future reporting on this. And my seconder is Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Okay. Any discussion? Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Really appreciate this motion. I'm wondering if I may ask through you to staff the feasibility of providing a little bit of a historic profile if the data is at hand. So building permits, say for the last 5 years, just so that we have a little bit of more longitudinal view of activity, and that would enable us to see perhaps last year was an aberration, or perhaps it's in keeping with the pattern. If I could ask through you for staff to comment on the reasonable sort of historic data they could bring to the table through this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking to the bench. Manager Catano.
I'll try one more time on this one. Yes, we do have historical data. We could look back and try and see if we can get that data for the last 5 years and give you some historical perspective.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. If the mover would deem it so friendly, I think it would be helpful, whether it be 5 or 10, whatever the mover would like, but I think a historic review would be important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So looking to the mover, is that a friendly amendment? I'm seeing nods and thumbs up. Okay, is there any further discussion? Does anyone need to see it on the screen, or is it clear? We okay? Councillor Kretsch. Oh, and then Councillor Beattie.
Just say 5 years is probably okay. Seeing that we're wanting to get this information back quickly, and if we don't think it's sufficient, we could always do something later, but I think 5 is probably fine.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Yeah, just requesting that it could be put up on the board so that I know what I'm voting on.
Absolutely. We'll get that up on the screen for everybody. Just take a moment. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Yep, it'll be up there shortly. Okay, here it is. There we go. Okay, Councillor Beattie, you still have the floor. Do you have any further questions or comments?
No, Chair, thank you for providing it on the board.
Okay, we'll now go to Councillor Taddison.
I just had a question for the mover through the chair. I'm seeing that the revenue collected also concerns fines from the Building Code Act, and is that something that you're interested in seeing as well?
Councillor Kretsch.
It was particularly the building permit fees themselves, not the fines. Didn't really occur to me, to be completely honest with you, that to think of breaking the fine information down by ward. Certainly, if anyone else is interested in that, I'd be happy to continue to be friendly and accept that amendment, but that wasn't the interest I had.
Councillor Tedison?
I'd ask that you accept that as a friendly. Just that the information for the Building Code Act fines collected be included as well, because that's another source of revenue.
So that's a friendly amendment. So building permit fees and fines, which are both spoken to in the report. Any further questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, we'll vote on that amendment. The vote is up. And that carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. And now to vote on the item itself. It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote. The vote is up. And that also carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. So we are going to move along to item 10, public hearings. The public has been advised of how to pre-register to be a delegate at the public meetings on today's agenda. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the development applications before us today, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. So the first item is item 10.1, application for a zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 81 and 87 Rymo Road East, Hamilton, PED 23216, that's in Ward 8. And this item has been deferred from both the December 5th and January 16th meetings. Okay, and we have staff Jennifer Caterino. And do we have a presentation? Verbal overview, okay.
Excuse me, thank you. Jennifer Caterino, Area Planning Manager for the West Team in Development Planning. So this is we'll give a verbal update. So since the December 5th Planning Committee meeting when this item was presented, staff were directed to work with the applicants on potential servicing solutions. There was a recognition that based on the timing of another development to extend DiCenzo Drive, if you recall where that is, it may delay the development of this building. So staff have gone back. We've worked with our colleagues in development engineering and the applicants. And as a result, we have revised the, excuse me, the holding provisions that were included in the original bylaw that was presented. So the revised Appendix B that's attached to the agenda today includes the revisions and the additional clarification on the items that development engineering will be looking for to move forward with a temporary or alternative solution for servicing. Happy to get into those details if you have any questions, but that's the quick update from planning.
Thank you very much. Are there any? Oh. Okay. Okay, so okay, only Councillor Danko on the speakers list. So Councillor Danko, you have the floor.
Thank you. So can I just confirm with clerks that when this was before us in December, we went through the presentation, we closed the public meeting, and then the report was deferred. So we're just on the report, correct? Okay. Thank you. So just very quickly, really appreciate all the effort that's gone into this by staff over the last couple months. In particular, the Growth Management Director Cora and Director Hannah for their involvement to find a way forward so this project could not only be approved in the zoning phase, but could actually move forward to construction so that there weren't inherent constraints that would not allow the project to actually be built. This is 220 new residential housing units that are on a transit-oriented corridor. When this initially came up, I did have some concerns about what that built form would look like on Rymal Road and what it meant to go to a TOC zoning designation versus some of the historic use in that area. But I think the project that we have before us now fits very well into that area. And I think there's going to be quite a few of somewhat similar projects along those types of main arterial roadways that we have on the mountain, where there are fairly large, that were formerly single-family home estate lots, to consolidate a couple of those, and seeing this type of growth really fit into that missing mill housing that we're trying to promote. So very much in favor. I have one question to staff, is that one of the discussions was about the need for larger family-friendly units. And my discussions with the developer, they did take that into account by suggesting some flexible space. So if I could ask through you to staff how that would work. I believe what we're approving today is the base plan with the 220 units, but there is an option, depending on sales, that some of those units could be combined if there is a market for that type of unit. But I'm just not sure how that will, work its way through the approvals process.
Thank you, Councillor.
So through the chair, so this zoning bylaw amendment is intended to approve 220 units. There will be flexibility on the applicant's side through the site plan control process. So it is our understanding that, the unit number mix may change. They may have fewer units, they may be larger. It will depend on that time, the market demand for what they see fit moving forward. But there is flexibility. We haven't, I think I had mentioned previously, we haven't built into the zoning bylaw minimum number of units or maximum, so there is that flexibility for responding to the market.
Thank you. And I really do want to highlight the developer Elite Developments in being willing to have that kind of flexibility in this build, that recognizing the need that there may be a market desire, there is a need for family-friendly units, larger units. I also want to recognize Elite Development and the developer for the letter that's on today's agenda, which I think is actually really important to point out, because one of the issues that we've had around this committee is that we are doing all this work processing all these zoning applications, but when it comes to actually building, the housing starts that the province is counting, there is a fairly substantial difference between what's approved through committee versus what actually gets built. So in this case, that was part of our discussions with the developer. They have sent a letter that is on today's agenda that commits that they will not just simply flip this land once the zoning's approved. They've committed to working forward to site plan and to sales and to construction for at least a minimum of 5 years, which I think is reasonable. But more importantly, I think it puts on the record that this is a builder, a developer that is committed to actually building this project, which I think, really kind of helps us as a committee and as staff to understand that the work that we are doing to move these projects forward is valued by the development community. So I do think it's important to recognize that. And as I said, I'm very supportive of this development, and I kind of see this type of template being exactly as a city of what we're trying to promote in that type of infill, affordable, missing middle housing on the neighborhood main arterial corridors. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Danko. Councillor M. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. So I apologize. I just wanted to receive clarification for something that I thought I heard or probably misheard or misinterpreted is more likely. In response to one of Councillor Danko's comments or questions, I thought I heard staff say that we don't have a provision in our zoning bylaws dictating the number of units. We let the market decide. Could I just understand when you meant, did you mean units per total building, or did you mean units per unit? So rooms or bedrooms per unit? Just seeking clarification on that. Thank you.
Through the chair, the zoning bylaw doesn't specify the number of complete units that can be constructed on the site. It's intended, like we expect there to be 220, give or take, but we haven't put in a maximum or a minimum to establish like if there will be 100 minimum on the site or not. So we expect the development to proceed as proposed through this amendment. So we anticipate 220 or so, give or take.
Councillor?
Thank you. I'm just further seeking clarification, I guess, on the interpretation of units. It's still not clear to me. We're saying we let the market determine the number of units in the building as a whole, or do we define units to be the number of bedrooms per unit? I just want some clarity. Thank you.
So you're asking about the mix of different bedrooms, numbers of bedrooms, 1, 2, 3, studio. Is that defined? And
Yeah.
is that what the market is leaving to the market to decide?
Is there an ability? Thank you, Chair, for that better clarification. Is it any practice which would afford us an opportunity in a zoning bylaw to enable or to direct that? Thank you.
Just conferring on the bench.
So through the chair, if the request is, we could consider including a minimum number of dwelling units with prescribed bedroom sizes, if that's the will of committee.
Councillor?
So I think this is probably, respectfully, Chair, a discussion to be had apart from this particular development for this committee in its articulation of desire for family-friendly units. If we have the capacity to perhaps enable that to some degree through a zoning bylaw, I think we should perhaps have that discussion separated apart, and I will talk to staff. Just so if I could get back, if I could, to another comment that was made. So when a developer makes an application, and in that said application, in this case 200 and some units, when we grant approval for that development, there is nothing in the granting of that approval which it ensures that they don't provide more units or they provide fewer units. I'm just wondering, what are the sort of parameters around that approval that we can ensure is enforceable, for lack of a better word, through you?
Thank you, Councillor. Manager Mackay?
Through the chair, Shannon Mackay, Acting Director of Development Planning. To your point, Councillor Wilson, historically we had built in minimum number of units or maximum number of units related to the density associated with the properties. We haven't done that in this case because we're allowing that flexibility with the hope that if the market determined it appropriate, that those units may change to allow for diversification in the types of units being 2 or 3 bedroom family-friendly units.
And that is, thank you, through the chair, but we have involved ourselves historically in the marketplace when it comes to parking requirements. Is that the case? We don't let the market determine that, but we let the market determine this. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the parameters, through the chair.
Thank you.
Through the chair. Again, historically, yes, the parking has been determined by the regulations. If you'll recall at committee on February 23rd, and then just recently at council, we have moved to implementing a market-driven parking requirement to acknowledge that kind of shift in how we regulate the parking on a property and as it relates to the units that are being provided on site.
Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I, on record as being very supportive of that in terms of consistency. If we believe the market knows, then we should enable the market on parking to determine as such as we do for livable units. I will, as I've mentioned, take it offline so I can have a better understanding of our capacity within zoning bylaws to direct the number of bedrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kretsch, you have the floor.
I won't belabor the point. Councillor Danko has already touched on it, but I think it's important to say publicly that there's a lot of anxiety around this issue of whether or not projects will be completed. In fact, I had a conversation yesterday with staff and planning about that anxiety and predictability of being able to say, look, is someone going to file a site application immediately afterwards? Are they going to follow through with this activity? So there can be some predictability for the community. This comes down to all types of things. Pedestrianization, because when you do developments of this nature, you close sidewalks, you have an impact on the pedestrian realm, you impact people's daily lives and their ability to get around, especially downtown. And so we're seeing more and more of these kinds of things happening where we're asking and trying to find ways to make the planning process a bit more predictable, find out if we can ensure that developers are going to do things. And we see lot after lot after lot downtown that just sits there forever, not being developed. So I really think it's likely the prerogative of this council at some point to try with whatever instruments we can to narrow that down. I think we did something pretty well when it came to tree protection, where we said, look, you can't cut the trees down within 30 days now of you actually demolishing a site. You have to wait. So you can't take the trees down here and then a year later start demolishing. We want to get the benefit of those trees as long as humanly possible. So I think there's possibly other ways to do this kind of work, and hopefully we'll make some progress on that later, not today. But I just want to signal that I think that letter is important in that way and setting the tone for what I hope we can get from every developer when it comes to them committing to completing their projects. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Kretsch. Over to Councillor Taddison.
Through the chair, just have a question for the bench. Basically, whenever we increase density, I always have concerns about traffic, and I was just wondering, what's the timeline for the Rymal Road expansion in this area?
Through the chair, Brian Hollyoak, Director of Transportation Planning and Parking. That EA is being conducted by our colleagues in Public Works. The EA is well underway, if not close to final. They would then proceed into detailed design and tender. I don't have an exact date for the year of construction, but that would be included in the capital plan, and I'm happy to send an email after this meeting to let you know the date.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no more speakers, we do have a written correspondence from the developer to receive. So could I have a mover and seconder to receive that, please? Councillor Kretsch, Councillor Danko. We'll put the vote up. Thumbs up from Councillor McMeekin. That carries unanimously. Thank you. May I now have a mover and seconder to put the report recommendations on the floor? Councillor Danko. Councillor Taddison. Any discussion on the report? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote. Votes up. That carries 10-0. Thank you very much, everybody. Moving on to discussion items. 11.1 is Taxi Financial Incentive Pilot Program, PED 24035, citywide. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor, please? Councillor Wang, Councillor Tattison, and I'll look to maybe Manager Smith if he'd like to give a brief overview.
Thank you, Chair. Dan Smith, Acting Director of Licensing and Bylaw Services, also Manager of Licensing. So through this report, staff are recommending the temporary extension of the Accessible Taxi Financial Incentive Pilot Program until such time as staff return to committee with a comprehensive review of Schedule 25 within the licensing bylaw. Schedule 25 is the regulated schedule for the taxi industry. The review of Schedule 25 was approved through Planning Committee Report 23-020, Item 8 on December 13th, 2023. The intent of the extension to the program is to allow additional time for staff to complete a full review of this pilot in alignment with the comprehensive review of Schedule 25 and how they can work together to provide the best opportunities for the taxi industry and accessible community while ensuring regulation and incentives are not compromising public safety or consumer protection. This report speaks to two financial incentives offered to the accessible taxi industry, one which provides a $5 per trip incentive for each accessible trip the driver completes. The second is an annual incentive based off the number of trips an accessible taxi driver completes through the year. These pilot incentives are fully funded through voluntary payment made to licensing and bylaw services by each licensed personal transportation provider. Examples of these are Uber and Lyft. These funds are used to support the accessible taxi industry through these incentive opportunities.
Thank you very much. We do have a speakers list. Councillor Kretsch.
In general, when I was listening to the comments from the delegate Kemp about the concerns that he raised, and while I'm no expert on the subject, one thing seems slightly apparent to me, which is that the taxi industry is not thriving, to put it mildly, in many ways like it used to be previously. And we're relying, though, as an organization, to provide services to the public on this industry. I mean, this is not a new problem for Hamilton, right? So we've obviously relied on other industrial partners over the last hundreds of years to do things. And then when those industries went to the wayside, we experienced all kinds of issues in terms of delivering services to residents. This is no different. So I guess what I'm wondering is, as part of this report back, or as part of a conversation in the future, I'm not sure where it lies, we can have a discussion, or if the discussion will start about, well, what do we do if our reliance upon this private industry ends up not really working out in the way we hoped, and we're not able to fully deliver the services that we plan to? What's our backup plan? How are we modeling a plan to continue to deliver services in the absence of the ability for the private industry to support us? Because it does seem like there are some challenges, and those challenges don't seem like they're going to get better. So how are we able to maybe manage that, predict that, plan for that? What's the plan, is my short question, I suppose. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Through the chair. So staff have been working with the taxi industry for a number of years on this. We've had many discussions with them. We do agree that their regular communication to us is that the industry is struggling currently at this time, which is partially why we've put this pilot program in place in order to try to provide some assistance to them through a funded method through another industry. Staff are also working regularly with our accessible committee as well. Some of that was paused through the months that the city was managing the COVID pandemic. Staff have re-engaged with that committee and are committed to follow through with that committee plus the taxi industry and any other stakeholder as part of the further review of this program and in line with the other review of Schedule 25. So it's continued communication with them to understand the impacts and where the municipality is in the best position to assist.
Thanks. So as a member of that committee, I think you might be suggesting I could bring it up there and have a conversation there. I will. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Wang.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just a couple of clarifying questions for me. I do see that the estimated cost of this program is $73,000. Where is that money coming from? Through you, Chair?
Through the chair, so the program is funded through the voluntary fee, which is paid to our division through the personal transportation provider fee in lieu of providing that service. That fee is 32 cents per trip that is provided. 6 cents of that trip is specifically used to support the accessible taxi industry.
I see, okay. And so because we're asking for an extension, that April 1 is several days ago. So at this point, it is completely paused. And this is why it's in front of us today, because to get an extension. And for how long is what I'd like to ask for.
Thank you.
Through the chair, that's correct. The program was set to expire April 1st. Initially, we were intending to bring this report back prior to that date. It was pushed back due to some of the reasons the municipality are dealing with currently.
What reasons?
The intended date that we are looking to bring back the full review of Schedule 25 would be in Q4 of 2024. So it would be a relatively short extension that would be incorporated into that review.
Thank you.
And then I understand that the review will be happening regardless, but who are the stakeholders that will be consulted for this review? Through you, Chair.
Thank you.
Through the chair, that's a list that staff are still putting together as part of that review, but the taxi industry would be included. That would be including the brokers and drivers, any plate owners or leaseholders. It would be our accessible community through the accessible committee that our division participates in. And it would be community consultation as well.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Taddison.
I know this is through the chair, I know this is a pilot project and so forth. You say the 6 cents fee is used to fully support the pilot program. Are there other jurisdictions that actually, do this as well? And what's the amount that they take per trip?
Through the chair, we've started doing some of that research now. We do understand that the City of Toronto and the City of Ottawa are also taking a percentage from the personal transportation providers and applying that to their local municipality. I don't have all the information about how specifically they're applying it, but I do know there is some breakdown of just general revenue intake to support other programs within their division, as well as the breakdown of supporting their accessible community through taxi as well.
Councillor?
Thanks very much for that. And I guess we could probably take a deeper dive with the Accessibility Transit Subcommittee. Is that something that we could look at in that committee?
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you. I look forward to working on that with you.
Okay, seeing no further speakers, the report has been moved and seconded, so we'll go to the vote. The vote is up. And that carries 9-0. Thank you. There are no motions on today's agenda, so we'll go to notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion today? Seeing none. We'll go to item 14. 14.1 is the general manager's update. Acting General Manager Robichaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As a result of me assuming, again, the acting interim general manager role, we made some staffing changes. Anita Fayback is now the acting chief planner and director of planning, Shannon Mackay has assumed the role of Acting Director of Development and will be dealing with all the matters pertaining to development applications, OP, zoning, Committee of Adjustment, et cetera, and Emily Coe has assumed the role of Manager of Zoning and Zoning Bylaw Reform. We do have a great bench strength in terms of their abilities to deliver, and we will continue to advance the work program, especially the work that Shannon and Emily and her team have been doing on zoning bylaw reform, the medium-density residential and the high-density residential projects. I also just wanted to remind committee about earlier discussion, the province is working on use it or lose it legislation, what that may look like. There was a discussion about will people act on their development approvals, and it's anticipated there may be something in the next housing supply action plan. I'm hearing it could be next week. We could see something come out from the province in terms of new provincial policy statement as well as legislative changes both to the Planning Act and the Development Charges Act. So we will be looking forward to seeing what that legislation is. At the next Planning Committee, April 16th, we do have two reports that will be of interest to the committee. One dealing with how we are dealing with accessory dwelling units and the process that we have in place to deal with the building permit applications around accessory dwelling units, and the team that is being put together to help applicants obtain their necessary permits and approvals for accessory dwelling units, as well as there will be a second report dealing with the demolition control bylaw and the demolition permitting process, because there's been questions around that. And on Monday at the Open for Business subcommittee, growth management staff will be presenting around the construction management plan. That's been an interest of the development community about the city's requirements for a construction management plan and how it works across all the various departments, as well as an update by the respective directors on how we are receiving and processing both development applications and building permit applications. We are challenged with not having some of our digital services being made available, but how we're working to accommodate existing applications, new applications, or other customer inquiries, whether it's on a zoning issue, zoning verifications, building permits, inspections, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last item I just wanted to note was we did receive a decision earlier this week from the Ontario Land Tribunal around the development proposal in Ancaster on Wilson and Lorne, where the site plan was appealed to the OLT for non-decision. The OLT dismissed that appeal, so it is a very complicated, dense decision. So we are still trying to work with our legal colleagues to better understand that decision. But essentially, my understanding is the OLT said that the official plan was the guiding document in the case that the Wilson Street secondary plan had height restrictions in it, that any development had to conform with that. And on that basis, the site plan appeal was dismissed. So we will see what that means, how the applicant wishes to proceed both in terms of the existing heritage permit and their development plans, but we will advise committee accordingly with a report back if any new information pertaining to that. So I know that's a lot of stuff I just announced, but I think it was just a lot. We've been very busy the last couple of weeks, and I just wanted to update the committee where we're going. And we will be providing some updates shortly relating to the work that we've been doing around the family-friendly housing, because it's been a while since we've been providing communications update on that, as well as some of the consultation around the major transit station areas and the inclusionary zoning file. We've been working on those two files as well, so I've asked staff to prepare some communication updates so that the public have a better understanding as to where we stand on those two important files. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very thorough update. We do have a speakers list. Councillor McMeekin.
Yes, thanks, Chair Kassar and Director, for that update. I appreciate that. GM, yeah. It has all happened so fast around here, doesn't it? It's just, congratulations too. And to those on the chain who are now directors, right? Okay. I was interested in the reference to use it or lose it. And I want to explain why. The big city mayors about a year and a bit ago raised the question of some, I think, 416,000 approved building permits that, due to a number of circumstances, supply side problems, labor problems, interest rates, what have you, we're sitting in limbo. At the same time that one senior level of government was pushing for the build it quicker, faster, better, blah, blah, blah. So I'm wondering if when this use it or lose it idea comes up, if we could try to build into that some sort of requirement that not just the process of applying for a permit, but once the permit is granted, that you got to get on with the job within a certain period of time. You just can't sit on it. While at the same time, all kinds of pressure on municipalities to get on with the job. That just is a very disturbing, in my humble opinion, contradiction. And that's even without getting into those who put big down payments up for condos and then discover that to get out of the deal, they got to buy it back at more than they paid for it, which is, there is, to the best of my knowledge, no protection on that front either. So if you have any comment on either of those aspects, that would be great. If you don't, I would appreciate it being looked at when it comes up. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the council, we're not sure what the province will put in the use it or lose it legislation. The chief building official does have the ability to cancel a building permit if there's no action on it. There has been a lot of discussion, though, with the province around translating that supply on paper into bricks and mortar and ensuring that it happens in a timely fashion, as well as ensuring that there's flexibility, like as you indicated, Councillor, if interest rates go up and the business model changes or sales slow down, we don't want to penalize proponents in that case. We also recognize there's situations where, like this one on Rymal Road we were discussing earlier today, some things are beyond the applicant's control in terms of some of the servicing and how they do the servicing on that situation. But it's really to look at trying to provide those incentives, because the cost to municipality is where we have to allocate water or sewer capacity to a development that may not occur, and that there's sort of that indirect cost. And in those situations, how do we encourage or incentivize the property owner to move forward with their development application, or to not be an obstacle to advancing a development application that may be on a neighboring property. So we will be taking your comments into consideration when we review the legislation and report back with the city's position on it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. I want to be clear. I wasn't suggesting that we come up with some rigid, hard-nosed answer. But I am suggesting that we need to be a lot more sensitive to builders who, on the one hand, say you've got to approve this within 60 days, and it's done, and then they sit on it for 3 years. And those that put big down payments up for condos, and in some cases end up homeless because they've got all their money tied up in an investment which they're struggling to get the money back on. So I just want to flag that, and I appreciate your answer. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Next on the list, Councillor A. Wilson.
With thanks, Chair, and I almost feel a little bad asking this knowing just how much is in the Planning Department's purview that we just heard in this update. Something else happening, because it's never a slow moment in planning in Ontario, is Ontario Reg 4124, just some of the impacts to planning. There's been lots of discussion at the Conservation Authority table, understanding the shifting role of that permitting body and that kind of body under the Planning Act, what protections are changing there. Do we know, or is it in staff's current work plan to think about what does information report to this body about those changes look like? Has that been anticipated? Would it be helpful to work on a notice of motion with staff in advance of next planning? Just kind of wondering how Reg 4124 has been interpreted so far, or where does it fall in the work plan currently? Understanding it's a full work plan as well.
Thanks, Councillor.
Through you, Madam Chair, or through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. I believe we were working on a communications update. I can't remember if it got released or not, but we are continuing. I know Ms. Fayback and Ms. Mackay have been working with the conservation authorities to better understand the implications, as well as Mr. Coit in terms of the natural heritage staff and how do we resource to do that. As I previously indicated, notwithstanding the changes to the conservation authority, our official plan policies and zoning regulations still remain in effect, so those have not changed. We are actually in the process of doing a bit of a review to make sure they stay current, and my understanding, as we commented on the draft NHS policies in the PPS council sent positions, they weren't significantly different than the current NHS policies, But I think one of the issues we will have is on a resourcing perspective, as more and more gets transferred from the Conservation Authority to the city to align with our official plan policies and council's vision in terms of dealing with that, whether it's in growth management staff dealing with stormwater management reports or Ms. Fayback dealing with development applications. Both teams may need additional resources. That's one of the things that we will have to be assessing and reporting back on as we continue to work with our Conservation Authority partners to implement those transitions. I think one of the more significant changes will be the ability of the conservation authorities to not to participate in OLT hearings. So that'll shift more of an emphasis on city staff to deal with that. And on those files that we deem to be of significance, we will use our, within our existing budget to bring in outside consultants to help bolster the city's case to ensure that we're always putting our best foot forward on those matters. But we will have to see sort of as we transition to that new framework. Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you. Really appreciating that there's, again, also going to be multiple probably communication updates ongoing as we get specific files or applications that maybe trigger something or we notice something there. I think on the front end, and again, just it's a question about capacity and maybe where, if this was included in the communication update that was talked about, was just understanding between using the buffer change, for example. I think that's a really clear one for people to imagine. Used to be 120 meter buffer around core natural features like provincially significant wetlands, now 30. So in those cases where a development application is coming within the 31 to 120 meter area, the conservation authority is no longer going to get a permit application, so they're not going to be necessarily notified. But as you've pointed out, Acting GM Robichaud, we have greenbelt policies, we have natural heritage system policies. Does it feel possible and timely that in that communication update, there'd be some analysis as to whether some of these changes are, because we have a natural heritage policy that already has, for example, a buffer zone that maybe is 120 meters or is 90, I don't have that right in front of me, there may not actually be a local impact because of the Greenbelt Act or because of our local heritage policy. But if we are a different city in a different area, there might be that update. So just kind of, because there's so many layers, understanding how those layers work together and the ultimate impact, a sense on the timing of that, or if that was envisioned in the communication update. And again, I understand capacity is a huge issue in asking this question.
Through the chair to the councillor, Anita Fayback, Acting Director of Planning and Chief Planner. The communication update does touch on that at a high level. As General Manager Robichaud indicated, our policies aren't changing. Our process isn't going to change either. We will continue to circulate the Conservation Authority on all development applications. It's just a regulated area and their responsibilities that are slightly different. But from our review and our perspective, nothing has changed within that 120 meter buffer distance. So as I indicated, the communication memo does outline the changes with that regulation and at a high level, the impact that it has on staff. And as the general manager indicated, what we will need to assess going forward is that impact on resourcing, which is, I think, is probably the most significant impact to the city. But again, we will continue to work with our partners at the Conservation Authority, continue to circulate all applications to them and continue to work with them.
Thank you. Really appreciate that conversation. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further speakers, I'd like to ask for mover and seconder to receive the general manager's update, please. Councillor Cretch. Councillor Wang. Go to the vote. Thumbs up from Councillor McMeekin. The vote's up. That carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to 15, private and confidential. We have 15.1, closed session minutes. Could I have a mover and seconder to approve the February 23rd, 2024 closed session minutes as presented and that they remain confidential? Councillor Cretch, Councillor McMeekin. If we want any discussion, we'll have to go in closed. I'm not seeing any. We will go to the vote, which is up. That carries unanimously, which puts us on to adjournment. May I have a mover and seconder to adjourn? Councillor Tattison, Councillor McMeekin. We'll go to the vote. Councillor Danko? And there are no dissenters. That passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to staff. Thank you, committee.